Quand on fait du piano, il y a un apprentissage qui est souvent délaissé. C'est l'apprentissage par imitation. En effet, on a souvent tendance à apprendre de manière scolaire, en rabâchant de la théorie, puis en l'appliquant avec des exercices pas souvent adaptés. J'ai notamment eu le témoignage de plusieurs élèves dont le prof leur interdisait de toucher un piano avant d'avoir fait au moins 2 ans de solfège. Pourtant, il est possible d'apprendre un instrument sans connaître la théorie musicale. Prenons l'exemple des violonistes manouches. Certains sont de véritables virtuoses et ne connaissent pas la théorie musicale ou le solfège. Pour apprendre le violon, ils ont tout simplement imité les violonistes de leur communauté avec qui ils vivent au quotidien.
Comment vous avez fait ça?
Avec la main.
Le souci, c'est que pour apprendre par imitation, eh bien, il faut être entouré de très bons musiciens et en plus, il faut les côtoyer régulièrement. Tout le monde n'a pas la chance d'avoir un entourage rempli de musiciens. Heureusement, depuis la démocratisation de la vidéo, grâce à YouTube notamment, eh bien, nous avons accès à des milliers, voire des millions de vidéos de pianistes depuis chez nous. Et ça nous permet de les imiter. Mais le son, la qualité de l'image et la visualisation des mains sont souvent mauvaises. Et ça rend le travail assez pénible. C'est pourquoi j'aimerais vous parler de l'application Floki qui a réussi à résoudre tous ces problèmes d'ergonomie et qui est disponible sur Android ou sur l'Apple Store. Dans cette vidéo, je vais vous expliquer disponible sur Android ou sur l'Apple Store. Dans cette vidéo, je vais vous expliquer comment apprendre le piano par imitation avec Floki en 5 points. Si vous voulez essayer gratuitement le logiciel Floki, le lien est en description, c'est parti. Premier point, choisir ses morceaux. Avant d'apprendre par imitation, il faut savoir ce que l'on veut apprendre. La priorité, c'est d'apprendre des morceaux qui nous plaisent, pour éviter ce que j'appelle le syndrome de la méthode rose. C'est-à-dire être forcé d'apprendre des comptines pour enfants alors qu'on est un retraité de 60 ans qui débute le piano. Floki a un catalogue de morceaux variés. Musique pop, musique de film, musique de jeux vidéo, chansons françaises, jazz et même pop asiatique. De quoi trouver un morceau qui vous plaît. Aussi, il faut choisir un morceau qui correspond à votre niveau actuel de piano. Floki propose de trier les morceaux par niveau et propose même plusieurs versions d'un même morceau. Par exemple, pour le morceau Clair de lune de Debussy, on a un niveau facile et un niveau un peu plus ardu. Point numéro 2, trouver un bon pianiste à imiter. Pour bien apprendre par imitation, il faut que le pianiste que l'on cherche à imiter assure. Le pianiste de Floki est excellent. Il joue les morceaux avec les bonnes nuances, n'hésite pas à prendre des libertés d'interprétation en accélérant ou en ralentissant un peu le tempo. Ça permet de copier sa sensibilité, sa musicalité, en plus de la technique pure. Ça, ce n'est pas possible avec un logiciel comme Synthesia. Aussi, les mains du pianiste de Floki sont très bien filmées, ce qui permet d'imiter facilement. Point numéro 3, découper l'apprentissage. Pour faciliter l'apprentissage par imitation, il va falloir isoler les passages difficiles. Avec Floki, on peut isoler la main gauche et la main droite, faire des boucles sur les parties qui posent souci, utilisez le mode attente. De cette façon, la partition suit votre rythme d'apprentissage. Elle défile quand vous jouez la bonne note. Pas besoin de connecter son piano, même si c'est possible. Ce mode marche avec le micro de votre smartphone ou de votre tablette. Point numéro 4, s'approprier le morceau. Une fois que votre morceau est appris, vous pouvez y mettre votre patte. C'est très bien d'imiter le pianiste de Floki, mais vous avez peut-être envie de créer quelque chose qui vous ressemble. N'oubliez pas de vous faire plaisir en exprimant votre sensibilité. Point numéro 5, allez plus loin. C'est excellent d'apprendre par imitation. Ça permet d'avoir des résultats rapides et de prendre confiance en votre instrument et en votre apprentissage. Mais si vous voulez gagner en liberté et ne plus dépendre d'un logiciel, il va falloir aller plus loin. Vous pouvez apprendre la lecture de partition. Ça vous permettra de jouer beaucoup plus rapidement les morceaux qui vous plaisent et en plus de ça, vous aurez accès à une bibliothèque infinie de morceaux et de partitions. En effet, avec des applications comme Floki, si vous voulez jouer des morceaux très difficiles ou peu connus, eh bien il va falloir attendre que les constructeurs, les développeurs mettent en ligne ces vidéos. Pour vous améliorer en lecture de partition, j'ai créé cette vidéo qui vous présente l'application Solfaread et qui permet de vous améliorer rapidement Vous pouvez aussi apprendre le jeu en accords. Ça vous permettra de jouer rapidement les suites d'accords de vos chansons favorites, de retrouver la mélodie à l'oreille, à la main droite, et d'improviser dessus par exemple. Pour s'initier à ce type de jeu, j'ai créé une vidéo sur les 4 accords magiques qui s'adresse aux débutants. J'espère que cette vidéo sur l'apprentissage par imitation et sur Floki vous a plu. Je vous invite à essayer gratuitement ce logiciel disponible en description.
How many individuals in the Vice President's office or the White House have tested positive this week, and how many of them have symptoms?
You know, we don't give out that kind of information. Obviously, Mark Short and a couple of the key staff around the Vice President have come down with the coronavirus. It just goes to show you that that we continue to face this enemy that came from China, and yet what we also know is the one area where we are rounding the corner is really the death rate as it looks at that. Our ability to handle this has improved each and every day, each and every month. And when there were estimates that as many as 10% of the population that got this would actually experience a fatal result, we're now down to 2.6. Every death is too many. But hopefully we're going to get this to the point where it's not as lethal as the flu.
So Mark, Pence advisor Marty Opes tested positive days ago, and that was not disclosed to the public at the time. According to the New York Times, quote, 2 people briefed on the matter said that the White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, had sought to keep news of the outbreak from becoming public. Why would you do that? Is it because it's yet another sign of how much the White House has failed to contain the virus?
Yeah, obviously that.
Because it's yet another sign of how much the White House has failed to contain the virus?
Yeah, obviously that's not a report. That's actually a tweet. And when we look at this, when we're really talking about...
No, that was in the New York Times story. That was in the New York Times story.
When we actually have people's health at risk, what we look at there, Jake, is sharing personal information is not something that we should do, not something that we do actually do, unless it's the Vice President or the President or someone that's very close to them where there's people in harm's way. Listen, anytime that there's someone in harm's way, we have an obligation to let people know, to contact trace. We have done that. We did
Chris
that.
Christie says you didn't do that with him.
In this particular, well, in that vein, when you look at Chris Christie, it's within 48 hours of symptoms. And when we looked at the president, there was not a contact within 48 hours of the president where he would qualify under CDC guidelines. We actually have a CDC person in bed. Hold on, Jay. We've got a CDC person embedded here in the White House that helps us with contact tracing.
Right. No, I understand that.
Day.
So, Mark Short has been in close contact with Vice President Pence. I mean, they are always with each other. Short is now positive for the virus.
That's correct.
So CDC guidelines say that Vice President Pence should quarantine for 14 days. Now, I understand the White House is trying to get around that by saying the Vice President is an essential worker. But Mark, how is going all over the country, how is that campaigning? How is that essential work? It's not like he's helping to contain the virus. In fact, the opposite. He's holding rallies that could be spreading the virus.
Well, actually, he's not just campaigning, he's working. We saw a Middle East peace agreement with Sudan in the Oval Office that the president engaged in. And for anybody to suggest that the president has been out campaigning and not getting things done, all you have to do is look at the facts.
He was at a campaign rally in Tallahassee. He was just in a campaign rally in Tallahassee.
I'm not saying he's not campaigning. I'm saying that is only part of what he's doing. And as we look at that, essential personnel, whether it's the Vice President of the United States or anyone else,
but he's not
has to continue on.
CDC guidelines.
Well, no, Jake, CDC guidelines does say essential personnel.
Yes, it says wear a mask. If they wear a mask.
And I spoke to the Vice President last night at midnight. And I can tell you that what he's doing is wearing a mask, socially distancing, and when he goes up to speak, he will take the mask off, put it back on. But he's wearing a mask as it relates to this particular thing because the doctors have advised him to do that. And so, Jake, when we start to look at this, here's where we really need to make sure. On your website yesterday, Jake, your website is talking about, well, now we think the spread is coming from small social groups and family groups. First it was large groups, now it's small groups.
It's coming from all sorts of places.
Well,
that's exactly the pandemic's out of control.
So here's what we have to do. We're not going to control the pandemic. We are going to control the fact that we get vaccines, therapeutics, and other mitigation areas.
Why aren't we going to get control of the pandemic?
Because it is a contagious virus, just like the flu.
Yeah, but why not make efforts to contain it?
Well, we are making efforts to contain it.
By running all over the country, not wearing a mask?
Jake,
that's what the Vice President's doing.
We can get into the back and forth. Let me just say this. is what we need to do is make sure that we have the proper mitigation factors, whether it's therapies or vaccines or treatments, to make sure that people don't die from this. But to suggest that we're going to actually quarantine all of America, lock down our economy.
No one's saying that.
Well, they are. Joe Biden's saying that. He says lock everybody down. We're going to have a dark winter. We're going to have a dark winter.
That's what health officials say. That's what health officials say, that it's going to get worse.
No,
we
that's
had the
Joe
two
Biden's
worst days.
Jake, let's be honest.
Friday and Saturday.
Let's be honest here. The health officials did not say dark winter. Those were Joe Biden's words.
He was quoting a health official. I think he was quoting William Haseltine.
When we look at the number of cases increasing, what we have to do is make sure that we fight it with therapeutics and vaccines, take proper mitigation factors in terms of social distancing and masks when we can. And when we look at this, we're going to defeat it, Jake, because we're Americans. We do that, and this president is leading while Joe Biden is sitting there suggesting that we're going to mandate masks.
The president is holding rallies all over the country.
That's correct.
No
In fact,
masks, no masks required, no distancing. There have already been, according to health officials, contact tracing. There have already been cases of individuals in Minnesota and in Washington, D.C., and in Oklahoma that got the virus at these Trump rally that Dr. Fauci himself called a super spreader event, the one at the White House.
There's also been contact tracing, Jake.
That is not leading.
There's also been contact tracing from reporters, some with your own group, where they actually have worn masks religiously. And so what I'm here to tell you is we need to find the vaccines and the therapeutics to actually give Americans the relief that this is not a death sentence, because it's not. And yet at the same time, to suggest that any of that is not accurate is just not based on the facts.
Here's the bottom line. We know, according to health officials, that masks are the best thing people can do in terms of trying to prevent the virus from spreading, period.
Yeah.
That's what they say. Until the vaccine and Operation Warp Speed, and until that all works out, the best thing to do are masks. That's from Dr. Redfield, it's from Dr. Fauci, it's from Dr. Birx, it's from everybody. Okay? Vice President Pence is the head of the coronavirus task force. He has been exposed to somebody who tested positive. The CDC guidelines say he should quarantine. Now you're trying to say he's running all over the country, meeting voters, campaigning, is an essential worker business. I don't think it is, but okay, if you do that, why is he not wearing a mask? I haven't seen any pictures of him on the tarmac or anywhere wearing a mask. And should the American people follow the CDC guidelines, or should they not? Because the vice president is not.
Well, I can tell you he is wearing a mask. He will be wearing a mask today as we have this. Obviously, when you have an exposure, you have to take additional mitigation factors to do that. But the other part of that, Jake, is this, is even those experts that you talked about, when we talk about masks, I said, well, if mask is the answer and mandating mask is the answer, can we put all our students back in schools? If we just mandate mask and make sure the teachers wear masks,
should Americans follow CDC guidelines?
Will they be safe? And the answer was no.
Should Americans follow CDC guidelines?
Certainly Americans should follow CDC guidelines. And when we look at that,
does that include the president?
That includes the president and it includes everyone, but there are special.
Well, then why don't your supporters wear masks at rallies?
Well, you're asking about the supporters versus the president.
Well, why don't you require? Don't you require supporters
to wear masks? We don't mandate masks because here's the other thing: is we offer them out. We live in a free society, Jake. And when you look at that, you know, under a Joe Biden's America, he would lock everything down. He would make sure. No, well, how do you know that? Have you asked him that question? Ask him that question, Jake.
Because I've seen a million interviews. I've seen a million interviews with it. We're not talking about hypothetical.
You are talking about how hypothetical.
I've interviewed Biden more than I've interviewed Trump. Okay, I'll put it that way.
I get that. Well, because from a standpoint,
we don't have to get into that.
We can get into that. In terms of interviews, I think most journalists would agree Joe Biden has largely been unavailable. He's hoping to run out the clock so that the American
people should abide by CDC guidelines, but you are not even asking your supporters to wear masks, even though
we pass them out, Jake. I mean,
do you know how many people in Minnesota have gotten the virus because of Trump rallies?
Have you been to a rally? You come on with us to a rally, and we'll show you. We give out masks. We have a number of people.
They don't wear them.
Well, it's a free society. You're not wearing one right now, Jake.
There's literally nobody in this room. There is literally not
Yeah,
one
and
person
so-
in the studio.
So you're saying that you always wear a mask wherever you go. Come on, Jake. The American people know that's not true. I know it's not true.
I wear a
And-
mask except when I'm in here, in my office, and home. That is true. 100%.
But
I
under
wear a
what-
mask when I walk in the hallway at CNN.
Моя карта радует меня постоянно.
Успей оформить карту Тинькофф Black на сайте tinkoff.ru и получить...
Если ты не знаешь, что это считается не дата, а дейта, да, то есть ты можешь и так сказать, да?
Welcome back, data download time, and a final look at the 5 counties in the 5 swing states representing different critical voter groups that we've been tracking all campaign season long. This week, we're checking on 2 make-or-break states for President Trump, Pennsylvania and Florida. First to Beaver County in western Pennsylvania. Mr. Trump won the county by 19 points thanks largely to white voters without college degrees. According to analysis by Q, he won that voting group nationally by 44 points, but in our most recent NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, President Trump's advantage with that group is down to just 21 points. And Beaver is where we find my colleague Maura Barrett. So Maura, is Beaver still Trump country?
Well, Chuck, Beaver used to be a Democratic stronghold, but those non-college educated white voters are also blue-collar, union-working voters who used to work in the steel industry, and now they're hoping that natural gas could be a boost for their local economy. So when we hear President Trump talk about fracking, he's speaking to the voters right here in Beaver County. And when we look at the campaign schedules in these final days leading up to the election, President Trump is focusing on areas like western and central Pennsylvania where he's got strongholds. Meanwhile, we see Biden yesterday going to counties where the race is tighter because he's hoping to shrink those margins that Trump has here in the state. Remember, Pennsylvania went for Trump by just 44,000 votes in 2016. Chuck?
Maura, thank you. Now let's go south to Miami-Dade in Florida, where we're looking at Hispanic voters specifically, including Cuban and Venezuelan Americans who are leaning Republican this year. Hillary Clinton won Miami-Dade in 2016 by 29 points, and she won Hispanic voters nationally by an even bigger margin. Now, Biden is still polling ahead of President Trump with the group nationally, but by a smaller margin than how Hillary Clinton did. My colleague Ellison Barber has been talking to voters in Miami-Dade. So, Ellison, is Biden going to do better than Hillary Clinton did?
Hey, Chuck. Yeah, the Trump campaign has spent a lot of time trying to tie former Vice President Joe Biden to far-left socialist policies, even suggesting that if he were to win, the U.S. could become the next Venezuela. Biden is not a socialist, but that message has resonated with many in Miami-Dade's Venezuelan and Cuban communities. In recent weeks, Biden has pushed back more forcefully on that narrative, but some of Biden's Latino supporters here in Miami have told us they're worried he waited too long to aggressively push back. Chuck?
Ellison Barber in Miami, Maura Barrett in Beaver, Pennsylvania. For us, thank you both. When we come back, Russia's at it again. Iran is too. How safe is your vote? NBC News Vote Watch is next. Hello from Washington, I'm Chuck Todd, and thanks for checking out the Meet the Press channel on YouTube.
Reaction pouring in across the country.
John King noted earlier, Joe Biden is not just ahead, he appears comfortably ahead, a fact confirmed by polls in the race for campaign cash. Yet few Democrats or analysts appear willing to make definitive predictions about the race. Just
Как так можно? Что такое спокойно? Нет, какой-то вот милый, ну нет, это все понятно. Ну и чё? бабская тема. Ну нет, сам ты не даешь. Пушишь, да не то, да не там, да не так. Папочка моя, папочка моя. Нет, не знаю. Какая разница, мне уже годы уже, какие еще годы, что тут? Все уже жизнь прожита, понимаешь? Остатки уже остались. Ну скажи, что не так. Дальше уже просто инерция просто, инерция. Маневр, да. Сдвигни, сдвигни.
11 days out after the ones many made 4 years ago. Our next guest is the exception, CNN's Fareed Zakaria. The headline of his new piece in the Washington Post, "I was wrong that Trump would lose in 2016. I'm doubling down in 2020. He writes, quote, "I will take my chances and once again predict that Trump will lose this election. Humbled as I am after these 4 years, I would still rather bet on and believe in the best in America." Joining me now is Fareed Zakaria, host of Fareed Zakaria GPS here on CNN. He's written the new book, 10 Lessons for a Post-Pandemic World. So, Fareed, why do you think that the president is going to lose this election? If you look at polls in, key battleground states, Hillary Clinton actually, is about where Joe Biden is now in many of those states, or was at this time in the race.
Look, Anderson, you can argue it many different ways, right? There's no question it's a tight race. We're a divided country. I guess I prefer to imagine an alternative narrative, which is borne out by a lot of data. Donald Trump has never been popular. He has always had a majority of the country against him, disapproving of him. He has the lowest approval rating of any president in recorded history. In 2016, he happened to run against the second most unpopular candidate in modern presidential history. And in 3 states with 70,000 votes, he was able to pull off an electoral college victory. I'm betting that doesn't happen again. Obviously, I don't know, but a part of it is, as an immigrant, as somebody who came to this country and felt like it was magical and was welcomed, to hear Trump and his, what is frankly just naked racism and racial appeals, I want to believe that's not America. I want to believe, and I want to bet on the America I know. And I'm going to do it, and maybe I'll be wrong, but I'm willing to put myself out on the line.
If the president does win a second term, what do you think that means for the United States, at home and abroad?
Well, I talk a lot about this in my new book, which is, the part of the problem has become this is very different from any experience America has had in the past, because this is not about what America does, it's about who we are. You know, in the past, people have criticized American foreign policy, the Iraq War, the Vietnam War, but that was about what America did. What Trump has represented for a lot of the world, for most of the world, is the idea that America is not what they had imagined it to be, this shining beacon of democracy, of pluralism, of diversity. You know, at some fundamental level, what everybody admires about America around the world is we're somehow able to bring all these people from all over the world together and make this first universal nation. Well, Trump stands in fundamental opposition to that. He begins his political career with birtherism. He begins his campaign calling Mexicans rapists. He announces during the campaign the Muslim ban, to you, as I remember, Anderson. That is something so different and so alien from the America that everybody around the world admires. So I think it would be probably an irreparable loss.
I spoke to Tom Friedman of the Times a couple weeks ago, and I mean, he was really concerned about the potential of civil conflict in the United States, that he believes our democracy is in terrible danger, more danger than it's been since the Civil War, more danger than after Pearl Harbor, a Cuban Missile Crisis. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that one of the dangers of Donald Trump is that he seems to recognize no limits, right? He's willing to do things that nobody else has ever done. And so it's really that fear that, like, if you face this danger, what happens? What happens if the President of the United States simply, challenges 20 different state elections? What happens if he asks the army to do things? I'm fundamentally more optimistic than Tom Friedman is. And one of the points I try to make in my book is, look, at the end of the day, the United States is always a mixed, messy country, but it has incredible dynamism and has this incredible value that it places on diversity. As I say, I'm going to bet on the America I know, not on the darker side of America.
I want to talk about your book, because despite the president saying that we're rounding the corner, it's nowhere near over. Cases are obviously rising in the U.S. and Europe. In your new book, you write, this ugly pandemic has opened up a path to a new world. What do you mean by that?
So there's no question that you're right. This is the biggest pandemic in a century. This is the most consequential event in our lifetimes, Anderson. It has affected every single human being on the planet in a way that 9/11 didn't, in a way that the global financial crisis didn't. But in doing that, it's dislocated everything. So as a result, change is possible. Think about how much we've all changed in our lives, right? We've agreed to isolate ourselves. We've agreed to spend hours, having deeply personal conversations with our laptops. We have been willing to change. If politicians lead us and tell us in this moment of enormous change, here's the way forward, I think we would get to a better place. But we need leaders who are willing to embrace that positive change.
Fareed, I appreciate it.
After both candidates took the stage one last time to pitch themselves to the American people. Our correspondents have been hanging out with voters, watching the presidential debates with some key demos. MSNBC senior national correspondent Chris Jansing is with young black female voters in Atlanta, Georgia. NBC News Now correspondent Dasha Burns is back in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, talking with Democrats and Republicans whose votes don't exactly line up with their party affiliation. And NBC News correspondent Rahima Ellis is with first-time voters on Long Island. Let's start in Georgia. Nearly 2 million people have already voted in the state. That's a 130% increase compared to this time back in 2016. But with just 11 days until the election, Georgia still has some undecided voters. Chris watched the final debate with 3 women from Atlanta, all looking for a candidate to help them make up their minds.
They definitely brought more energy.
I thought it was a lot better. I thought that she did a phenomenal job. Biden, to me, looked more presidential than he did in the last debate.
He was in it. He was in the debate like a real president. I did appreciate that mute button. That mute button was great. That was great. And he knew, after he got muted, he knew that she meant business.
I appreciated the fact that Biden acknowledged that systemic racism does exist.
This was the first time that I've seen Biden acknowledge any type of responsibility, and this is one of the first times that I've heard any presidential candidate talk about the talk.
Are you ready to vote now?
I am ready to vote
for
Biden.
I'm going to decide after I've done every shred of research that I can do.
So are you moved to vote now for someone?
I'm going to wait till the fact checkers do their job tomorrow. As of right now, tonight, I am not moved.
Разместите вакансию на ХХРУ всего за 199 рублей. Ведь здесь можно найти любого сотрудника.
Chris joins us now from Atlanta. Chris, you watched the debate with those women last night. What moments or issues got the biggest reaction from them?
Yeah, I think, you listened yesterday as they told us what they wanted to hear from them last night. And look, the crime bill in 1994 that led to the mass incarceration of so many young black men was so heavily on their minds. It's probably what they talked about most. And they really were impressed by the fact that the former vice president talked about that. Much more impressed with his answer to the question about black parents having to have the talk with their children than they were with Donald Trump's. And I think overall they were looking for a more aggressive, definitely a more aggressive former vice president, and they feel like they got that. One of the things that they actually had a very light moment about was the mute button. They thought the mute button worked great, that in the end they learned a lot more. Did they get the answer to all of their questions? No, but they really felt like this was a debate, as I think most Americans did, where it actually was a debate, where you got to hear both sides, and where they feel like they walked away better informed and ready, as you heard at the end of that, to go and to be able to research a little more before some of them will make their decisions.
Chris, I have to agree with them. I think the mute button Kristen Welker combo was just unstoppable last night.
Amazing.
We heard Renisha say there that she's right. I mean, Kristen was something else. We heard Renisha say there that she's ready to vote for Biden. What was missing for Shar and Janice?
I think there's a couple of things. One is they're very concerned about his economic policy. If there's one thing that many of these younger black voters who are not taken with Biden tell me is that the opportunity zones, for example, some of the other things that the president has done to help black entrepreneurs has been very important to them. Maybe you saw that the most Googled thing during the debate last night was the $15 minimum wage, and all of them have been some variety of entrepreneur in their life, and they had quite a long conversation off camera about the idea that $15 in Atlanta is different than $15 in New York City or Los Angeles or Peoria, and their question was, do we need a $15 minimum wage? It was something that they wanted to look further into. So not all the questions that they had got answered, but they certainly got their interest piqued in some of the things and had their concerns allayed in others.
Chris, you're in Atlanta. Atlanta's Democratic Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms was on Morning Joe today with a warning for voters. Take a listen.
The question that remains to be seen are all of these early voters, people who were going to vote anyway, and they've just shown up early. And what I've said repeatedly is just to remind people not to fall for what happened in 2016, where we thought we had it in the bag and people thought their votes didn't matter. Every vote counts. We still need people to show up.
Chris, people certainly are showing up to vote in Georgia. What else can you tell us about the high voter turnout there?
Yeah, I think we're right around 2 million, maybe even a little more. They think they could smash all previous records and hit 5 million eventually. I can tell you we were at a polling place yesterday, and they have these drop-off boxes for people who are nervous about whether the mail is actually going to get their ballot in. And so they brought them by hand to this library where we were. All of that tells you the interest here. And if anyone had said to me 6 months ago that 11 days before the election I'd be standing in Georgia, I would have thought you were crazy, but this is a dead even race. Yesterday I mentioned that a recent poll had it at 45-45. There's now a more recent poll, Allison, at 49-49. which tells you just how few of those true undecideds are left and how it could really turn things, which is why Kamala Harris is here right now. She's talking to students at an HBCU. She's going to do one of her drive-in events later. But again, toward the end of a campaign, the most valuable commodity any campaign has is its candidates, and she's here in Georgia today. Allison?
Chris, you said it. There are few undecided voters in Georgia, but somehow you managed to find them, and they had great perspectives. Thank you so much for sharing them with us.
Thanks.
Моя карта радует меня постоянно.
Тинькофф Блэк начисляет деньги каждый.
Pennsylvania, an important state this election. If the Trump campaign can't pull off a win there, its chances of hitting 270 electoral votes drop dramatically. That's why our very own Dasha Burns has been spending so much time in Beaver County, right outside Pittsburgh, for our County to County series. Beaver used to be a Democratic stronghold, but Republicans have won here by increasing margins over the last 3 elections. In fact, Donald Trump took the county by almost 20 points in 2016. Dasha joins us now from Beaver. Dasha, let's talk about the dynamics there in Beaver and the voters you've spoken with, several Democrats and Republicans with different issues this election. Tell us about this county and those voters.
Hey, Allison, you set that up so nicely. This is a fascinating place because when Donald Trump won here in 2016, there were about 20,000 more registered Democrats in this county than there were Republicans. And as you mentioned, this was once a Democratic stronghold. You used to find a lot of blue-collar Democrats here, most of them working in the steel industry. That industry left, and since then, Republicans have been doing better and better in this county. And in 2016, there were a lot of Democratic voters, folks who voted for Obama and then said, you know what, we're going to give this other guy a chance. And so today I had a very interesting lineup of voters. I spoke to 2 lifelong Democrats who voted for Donald Trump in 2016, have since re-registered as Republicans, plan to vote for him again. I also met a Democrat who voted for Trump who is not planning to vote for him again, and a Republican, a lifelong Republican who is voting for Joe Biden and has recently re-registered as a Democrat. So party lines are very muddled here in Allison. This is reflective of what I've been hearing across the country, frankly. There are a lot of folks right now that don't feel at home in their parties, and the question here is, Joe Biden is not going to win Beaver County. It's very, very unlikely, but can he eat into the margins here enough, win back some of those Democrats, and maybe win over some Republicans to eat into the margins enough and help him out in the state overall? Allison?
Dasha, it is so fascinating to hear you explain how people have voted, how they're switching, what their concerns are. Let's talk about how those voters viewed the debate last night. The American public watched a real debate on real issues yesterday. You could actually hear what the candidates had to say. What are those voters in Beaver County saying about the debate this evening?
Yeah, Allison, the other thing that was audible was a sigh of relief from both Biden and from Trump supporters, just hearing something civil, hearing some real substance. Both Biden and Trump supporters I talked to were just happy to have, as you said, a real debate. Take a listen to just some of the takeaways from the voters I talked to today.
Когда непогода бросает вызов, шины Bridgestone Blizzak Spike 02 принимают его. Крепкий, направленный шип из карбида вольфрама обеспечит надежное сцепление.
I thought that Donald Trump did excellent. He offered a lot of hope, which we don't see that very often. Everything that he said, he talks about all of the positive things that he's done.
I thought last night was much more civil, and I didn't see a whole lot of difference, though, in the content from our president. He continued to misconstrue the truth. I'll be nice and say it that way. I thought the vice president did very well considering all that. I was pleasantly surprised that there were no real attacks on his family like I expected there to be. Overall, I thought it was very positive.
Allison, one point of agreement across all of the voters that I talked to today was that our colleague Kristen Welker did a phenomenal job. They were very impressed with how she handled this and allowed them to hear what these candidates actually have to say on the issues. Allison?
Dasha, I think that is the one thing Democrats, Republicans, independents, unaffiliated, whatever your party affiliation is, I think everyone is in agreement that Kristen just did a terrific job. I know all of us are so proud of her. It was wonderful to watch. Let me ask you about one more big issue there in Beaver County, natural gas and fracking. What are folks there saying about how President Trump and Joe Biden have addressed those issues which are so important to them?
Yeah, this is huge here, and it did come up in a big way last night. We talked about how the steel industry left this town and left this community pretty hard hit. Well, a lot of folks credit some of the resurgence that we've seen here recently to the gas and fracking industry. In fact, just down the road here, there is a major Shell ethane cracker plant being built that is bringing thousands of jobs to this area and is giving a big boost to the local businesses here on this main strip in Beaver. And so this hit home for a lot of folks I talked to. I want you to hear from Katie Lashane. She worked in oil and gas for about 10 years. Here's how she viewed some of what she heard on this topic last night. Listen.
When Biden had mentioned that he wanted to phase out oil and gas, I think that was a big one for me. And to hear him voice his opinions on the energy industry and how he wants to be zero emissions, all I can think about is that is going to cost the taxpayers, and that is going to hit home harder for the middle class.
And Allison, I did talk to Biden supporters about this as well, who like his position on energy, but even they said that he needs to be much more clear about where he stands, especially on the issue of fracking, that he does not plan to ban fracking. He really needs to clarify that to voters here in Western Pennsylvania. Allison?
All right, Dasha Burns reporting for us from Beaver County once again. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Allison.
Ever wonder why so many people say they want to learn guitar, but very few actually learn to play?
Did the final debate do anything to swing first-time voters? NBC News correspondent Rahema Ellis spent the evening at Stony Brook University on Long Island watching the debate with some undecided students there. Rahema joins me now from Stony Brook. You spoke with a number of students last night. What did they think of the debate? What was their overall impression?
For these first-time voters, they're in a presidential election, Allison, their overall impression is what you've been hearing from some others so far in this segment, and that is they were pleased that it was a lot more civil. These students were saying that they wanted civility between the two men who are vying for the highest elected office in the country, and they were glad that they got it. For them, while we are on a college campus, this is not just an academic exercise for them because the pandemic is affecting them as well. We're all required to wear masks. And while colleges are designed for academics and socializing, they're also required to social distance themselves. And they wanted to hear from the candidates about what they might do in order to bring their lives back to normal. It was not about entertainment. It was about a clear purpose that these students had when they watched this debate. Take a listen.
The last debate was very, uncomfortable for me watching as a citizen. This one, I cannot say completely comfortable, but I did get some clearer answers. Not completely satisfied with the answers that I did hear, but it definitely did not sway my election decision.
I felt the format was much cleaner in a way compared to the first debate. There was less talking over on both sides and interruptions. I appreciated that. And I would say I feel like the policies really came through in this debate, even more so from the first debate.
And Allison, I have to tell you, it's a trifecta here because students were also saying that they liked the fact that there was a mute button. It gave them an opportunity to hear the candidates express their opinions and ideas and policy positions or not. And they also, as everyone has been pointing out, love the fact that Kristen Welker did an excellent job. Allison?
We just keep saying what a winning combination. Kristen and that mute button, you just can't beat it. Rahema, did the debate help any students make up their minds? I know they're still trying to figure out what they're going to do. Has anyone decided after last night?
Well, there were a few people we talked to who were leaning in a particular direction. Very few people said they were totally undecided. But the debate was meaningful for them in terms of, again, they wanted to hear issues, and issues were talked about. The pandemic, race relations, national security. One student said he wanted to hear a little more on foreign policy, but nonetheless, listen to what they said about how much the debate impacted how they will actually vote.
Definitely sealed it. Trump wants to open up the country. That's essential. We can't keep ourselves closed in any longer. And he said that, and I agree with him.
I believe that I made the right decision in the way that I casted my vote, because Biden really came at this debate with facts and like with actual policy issues whenever he was able to kind of, talk about it. And Trump kind of came with a lot of sensationalism.
Did you know there is one 5-word question you should never ask a woman if you want her to sleep with you, become your girlfriend?
So we're talking about people who are between 18 and 23 years old, Gen Z, and it should be noted that there's something like 23 million eligible Gen Z voters for this presidential election. That's a whopping 16 million more of them than in 2016. They're excited, they're engaged, they're enthusiastic. But the young man whom you just saw there, Huntley, he said, he's a political science student, he said what he hopes will happen is that they will also be engaged enough to actually go to the polls, because there's a lot of talk. Now they want to see it put in action, because at this point, senior citizens still tend to outvote younger voters. Allison?
Those younger voters are a strong and an important voting bloc. We certainly hope they will go to the polls. Rahima Ellis on Long Island, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here.